So like many other readers, especially a lot of other bookish content creators, I have a bit of a spending problem. I love to buy more books than I'm reading them. And I want to get better about that. So in 2026, I'm going to be more mindful about my spending habits and also challenge myself to not buy a book until I have read at least 50 books off of my physical TBR. And I'm hoping to try and do that by the time we hit April, because I live in Houston, and in April, or at least last April, I'm assuming they're going to do the same thing again this April, Houston does the indie bookstore crawl. So indie bookstore day is not just like one celebratory day, it's an entire month-long challenge to hit as many indie bookstores as possible in the Houston area, because we have so many, and it's a month long because, I don't know if you know this, Houston is really far from Houston, and it's just terrible. The traffic is just terrible. So I would love to do a lot of shopping in April, but I cannot justify the amount of books I would like to buy with so many unread books on my physical TBR. Now, I'm not going to go through and count how many, because it would require like me pulling things out of shelves and moving my trinkets, and I'm really not in the mood. But just know I 1010% have more than 50. Okay, we're gonna leave that at that there. But reading challenges like this make it fun. I also am trying to challenge myself more into reading classics. I've really fallen in love with classic literature, especially in this past year. I think reading older language that is a little bit complex at times is really good for my brain. It's also really nice to go to the source of things, to go for the more influential work, the more revered work, and see just how far their influence reaches. So this video is about all of the classic or older pieces of literature that I have on my shelves that I am aiming to read this year. I have 7. For the past couple of years, once I started getting into reading more classic literature, I've had a great white whale, which is a really chunky brick of a classic piece of literature that is really intimidating. My first white whale was The Count of Monte Cristo. My next white whale was Moby Dick. It felt fitting. 2026's white whale is Crime and Punishment. This will be my first piece of classic Russian literature. This is the Penguin Classics version, obviously. Part of what makes me nervous is my lack of familiarity with Russian literature. One thing that I've heard very frequently about it is that Russian literature really loves nicknames, especially nicknames that are really similar to each other. And I think I got a taste of this in not Russian literature, but in something with too many names that are similar. Wuthering Heights. Oh, it was pissing me off. Like, what do you mean we have 2 Catherines? One Catherine is the daughter of the other Catherine. We have Linton and Heathcliff, and we have Heathcliff's son, Linton Heathcliff. Don't piss me off. But I'm really excited about Crime and Punishment. This seems to be like a lot of people's favorite classic in general in life ever. And it gets referenced a lot, just like in movies and TV shows and other books. This is about a young man who commits a murder, and at first he doesn't feel bad about it, and then I guess at some point he feels bad about it. So I'm really looking forward to that, but I am, of course, nervous. And I have Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. Is this a classic? It came out in 1956. What constitutes a classic? Does it just have to be old, or does it need to be old and impactful? Oh, it does have to be noteworthy. Is Till We Have Faces noteworthy? I'm keeping it on the list because it's old. This is also going to be the only TBR read that would be a reread. I read this years ago and really, really loved it because it has to do with like a very bitter woman. And I don't know, I like that. It's a reworking of the story of Cupid and Psyche from Greek mythology, but it's told from the perspective of Psyche's sister, who is ignored by everyone and jealous. I have it marked with like little book darts, but I don't remember what exactly about it I would have marked. That's on the list regardless. And then the other 5. The other 5 I own because I went on a whole little journey this past year about collecting all of the books that were part of this one republishing of classics that Harper Teen did a few years ago, like 10 to 15 years ago, where following the hype of Twilight, they republished a bunch of classic literature in the book cover style of Twilight. And so I read some of my Twilight-inspired Harper Teen editions. This year I read Sense and Sensibility, and I read my Wuthering Heights. I also own the Pride and Prejudice copy and the Romeo and Juliet copy, but I've read those books in general already. What's on my TBR for classics I have not read that are also in this collection with the book covers I really, really love. The Scarlet Letter. I've never read The Scarlet Letter. I know what it's about. I love Easy A. This was not required reading in high school. We did not read this as a class. It's about a woman who cheats on her husband, and the entire town shames her and forces her to wear an A for adulterer, and she refuses to give up the name of her cheating partner, which I think is pretty crazy because I don't think any man is worth that. But I know it'll have a lot to say about shame, and okay. The thing about these Twilight-inspired book covers by Harper Teen is that there's like a little line on the front of every cover that has to do with love. Where are my other copies? On the Sense and Sensibility copy, it says Love is Blind in the top corner. The Wuthering Heights one is my favorite. It says Love Never Dies, but Wuthering Heights also has a little permanent sticker that says Bella and Edward's favorite book. For Pride and Prejudice, it says The Love That Started It All. And on Romeo and Juliet, the original Forbidden Love. And so what makes me a little bit confused, because I don't know anything about the actual relationship that this lady has with her cheating partner. But the little tagline on the front of this one says, Love defies the rules. Are we meant to root for her and her, like, side piece? I guess we'll find out. And now on to Emma. I'm on a real Jane Austen kick. Love her down. Emma's fun. It's very pink. I also love Clueless. I'm looking forward to this. The tagline for this is Love is a Game. She's also a brick. But moving on to the biggest brick in this collection, Jane Eyre. Look at that. She's thicker than Crime and Punishment. This is Jane. Crime. For this one, the line is Love Conquers All. I'm really excited about this one because I really loved Wuthering Heights. And so I'm very intrigued to read the other Bronte sister and to read this other piece of really iconic Gothic romantic literature. Because I've heard some crazy things, you know? And also, if I remember correctly, Jane Eyre is the book where there's a line where the main character breaks the fourth wall and is like, Reader, I married him. And it's like a jaw-dropping moment. I don't really know what leads up to that and why that's so shocking. I'm scared. But Jane Eyre is high up on my classics TBR for this year. Then we have my last Jane Austen in the collection, but it's not the last Jane Austen on my general TBR. I really want to read Northanger Abbey. But in this collection, we have Persuasion. Persuasion has to be the Jane Austen work that I know the least amount, because at least going into Pride and Prejudice, I had already loved the movie Pride and Prejudice. Before going into Sense and Sensibility, I loved the movie Sense and Sensibility. I have never seen a Persuasion movie, and I don't know of any like modern movies that were modern adaptations of Persuasion or heavily inspired by Persuasion, like Clueless, like a 10 Things I Hate About You situation. Do you know what I mean? The only thing I know about Persuasion, story-wise, otherwise, is that Dakota Johnson had a starring role in a recent, I think, Netflix adaptation of Persuasion, and people hated it. And that's all I know about it. Like, I know nothing of this plot. The tagline is A Love Beyond Measure. Oh, this is a second chance romance. Interesting. The last piece of classic literature in my collection, both as my physical TBR classic thing and like as the Harper Teen Twilight situation, A Midsummer Night's Dream, with the tagline, Love Casts a Spell. I'm also upset this wasn't part of the Shakespeare lineup that we read in high school either. The only pieces of Shakespeare that we read in high school were Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth. When a lot of people read A Midsummer Night's Dream, and I know a lot of like theater programs will put it on as well. Like, it seems to be really popular. I also know very little about this. I know there's a party and then someone has a donkey head. That's the only thing that I'm like confident about for A Midsummer Night's Dream. Someone has a donkey head. And there might be a fairy in this. I don't know. We shall see. But those are the classics I'm hoping to tackle this year. I think it'll be the most amount of classics that I'll have read within a year, and some of these are much more intimidating than others. I'm looking at my bricks right now, and I'm looking forward to checking back in towards the end of the year to see just how many of these I actually read. So I'm posting this in part as like an accountability thing. And if you have any plans to read any piece of classic literature this year, let me know. What are they? If you have any strong opinions about any of the works I've mentioned in this TBR, let me know. If you're in Houston looking forward to the indie bookstore crawl, let me know. I have a lot that I need to do this year. Thank you for watching. Bye.